Today on an all-new Dr. Phil.
I will die upstairs in my bedroom that I share with my husband.
Is it acceptable to ask for a physician's aid in ending your life?
She's dealing with, at times, pain that not even morphine can alleviate. Within 5 minutes of Brittany taking that medication, she fell asleep very peacefully.
When medicine is used to cause the death, that isn't dying, it's killing.
The arrogance of that statement.
Assume that you or somebody you love is facing a really serious physical challenge, a diagnosis that is terminal. Is it acceptable, when you know that's the case, to ask for a physician's aid in ending your life? How many of you would agree that it's reasonable to say, I want to do this on my terms, and you would agree it's reasonable to ask for assistance to end your life? Raise your hand. Okay, that's about 80% of you. How many of you would disagree and say, no, not up to me? Okay. Well, in 2014, after being diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, 29-year-old Brittany Menard ignited a worldwide discussion and transformed the conversation about dying on your own terms. Take a look.
When you realize that you're going to die and then you learn how you're going to die, you have choices to make. And those choices aren't easy.
Last spring, Maynard was diagnosed with the most lethal form of brain cancer and given 6 months to live. She moved from her home in California to Oregon because of its Death with Dignity Act, which would allow her doctor to prescribe a lethal dose of drugs to end her life.
I have a tremendous sense of relief now that I've had the prescription filled and it's in my possession.
Brittany Maynard's message was clear. She said she intended to die with dignity.
I will die upstairs in my bedroom that I share with my husband, with my mother and my husband by my side, and pass peacefully with some music that I like in the background.
It was Brittany that was in control of things, and there was such an amount of relief in that. She didn't have to be terrorized by that tumor any longer.
In her final Facebook message, Maynard wrote, "I have chosen to pass away with dignity in the face of my terminal illness. Goodbye, world. Spread good energy. Pay it forward."
Maynard was a few weeks short of her 30th birthday. A spokesman said she died at home, quote, in the arms of her loved ones.
Brittany's very public decision to end her life has put the right to die issue back into the national spotlight in less than 1 month. Her original YouTube video has gotten nearly 10 million hits.
Sharing my story, I've realized there's a bit of a legacy, and I'm not ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed to attach my name to what I think is a right that should belong to all terminally ill Americans.
Well, today, medical aid in dying, formerly referred to as physician-assisted suicide, is becoming more and more widespread. As of 2019, over 200 million people around the world are living in jurisdictions that permit assisted dying, including 10 U.S. states and Washington, D.C., plus 9 countries. Last month, 82-year-old Mark Fleischman, the former owner of Studio 54, decided to end his life at a Swiss clinic. He told the New York Post, "I can't walk, my speech is messed up, and I can't do anything for myself." In March 2022, sisters, 54-year-old Lila Amari and 49-year-old Susan Fraser, chose to end their lives at another Swiss clinic that accepts patients who are not terminally ill, which has ignited a whole different conversation. With growing popularity and legislation, the debate about medical aid in dying is on the rise, and the moral, ethical, and medical factors are being discussed more than ever before. So let's start this conversation with Dan, who says his wife, activist Brittany Menard's choice to die with dignity was her personal choice to make. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Phil.
Your wife was lovely. I mean, just a lovely spirit, just really obviously loved life, right?
For sure, yeah.
And her diagnosis was uncontroverted in terms of being terminal, right?
Correct.
Brain cancer?
Correct. We discovered the tumor, it was actually New Year's Day of 2014. 10 days later, Brittany had brain surgery. They were able to remove only about 35% of that brain tumor that's on the screen right now.
So it was intrinsic then,
yeah,
that it invaded.
and so at that point, it was a grade 2 astrocytoma glioma, for those keeping track at home.
Right.
Unfortunately, just a couple months after that surgery, at the first follow-up MRI, the amount that they were able to remove, that had already grown back about 20%. So all of a sudden, it's a very aggressive form, indicative of a glioblastoma multiforme. So the most aggressive type of brain cancer. And they then informed Brittany that 6 months, that's all you have. And keep in mind, she's 29 years old. So with that news, Brittany said, Dan, I will continue. We will continue to fight this. That's what you do when you have cancer. But she said that we will wage that battle from Oregon, because there, at least, she knows that she can take back that little bit of control from that cancer and ensure that her dying process would be gentle. Right. And so we had to move to Oregon. At that time, there were only 4 states that allowed a terminally ill individual the option of medical aid in dying. There are now 11 states. Right. So,
and when they told her 6 months, the deterioration during that time is very predictable. Quality of life deteriorates. Right. So it's not like 6 months and then it's over. The quality deteriorates really fast during that time, and that's what she was talking about.
Yeah, so she's dealing with, at times, pain that not even morphine can alleviate. Right. She's having this constant pain at the base of her skull, the nausea, the vomiting, inability to sleep for days on end. Put yourself in her shoes. This is what you experienced. What terrified her the most were the seizures. And those were only getting worse, more pronounced, more severe, more frequent. And, those would leave her unable to communicate after she would have a seizure, typically for 20 to 30 minutes. When she would have the full grand mal seizure, she had 3 of those. And every muscle in her body is contracting. As she comes out of those, blood's coming out of her mouth because she had bitten through part of her tongue. That's just the new normal that Brittany is tolerating. But as you put it, that's kind of that progression to that cancer is indeed growing and it's playing out. And Brittany simply said that she was not going to allow cancer to be in the driver's seat as to how her final few days on this green earth play out.
Right. So her choice was, I can suffer horribly for 6 months and then die, or I can suffer and control it to some degree for a shorter period of time and then die. I'm going to die either way. I just get to pick what the journey is going to be before I do. Yeah. And, people would say, well, just take pain medication. Yeah.
But as I mentioned,
that doesn't fix it.
She's on Dilaudid. That's 4 times stronger than morphine.
Right.
And, that is unable to keep her from experiencing that pain. And then also, and I've had this conversation with plenty of palliative care physicians. Well, can you control the seizures? Can you keep her from what's coming next as the tumor grows and puts pressure on different parts of the brain, the optic nerve, that she goes blind? If she suffers a stroke, depending on what part of the brain is damaged due to the lack of oxygen during the stroke, well, now she's partially paralyzed or completely unable to communicate. And Brittany's like, that sounds like literally, being tortured to death. And so for her, it was that she wanted to live as herself for as long as possible. And mind you, this isn't happening in a vacuum. I mean, during that time, we're researching any clinical trial that offers any glimmer of hope. Right. So her goal is to live. Her goal is to live as long as possible. But when, she is in that active dying process, and it is becoming more apparent that Brittany said, no, I'd prefer to be able to pass away gently. And within 5 minutes of Brittany taking that medication, she fell asleep very peacefully. The emotion just comes up. Within 30 minutes, her breathing slowed to the point where she passed away. That's the dying process that this program afforded her. Yeah. The idea that anybody, any of the opponents would attempt to take that from her, who has the right? Who has the right to dictate and say, no, Brittany, you just need to keep suffering? Brittany refused to accept that. She felt it was a huge injustice that we had to leave our home, and she didn't want anybody else to ever have to go through that. So that's why she spoke up. But again, she just felt that who has the right to try to impose their belief system onto her, especially when they have no idea the journey that she's already, what she's gone through and the pain, the discomfort, the suffering that she's experiencing. Yeah. So,
I notice you still wear your wedding ring, but on your right hand.
Yeah, that was one of the many instructions that Brittany had for me. She said, Dan, you know, maybe after a little bit of time has passed, she said, you don't have to wear that wedding ring anymore, but, you know, maybe you could, if you feel like you could wear it on your right hand, which then still leaves, you know, the opportunity on your actual wedding ring finger for possibility of things down the road. So Brittany, and of course those were conversations at the time that I'm like, sweetie, yeah, okay, fine, I don't want to talk about that kind of stuff. But to her, it was important. It mattered. She did. Yeah. She wanted to talk about a lot of things. And so, yes.
Well, have advances in medical science outstripped morality? I mean, we've really made advances. Are we keeping people alive when we shouldn't? Because we have the technology to do so. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot of other aspects of this when we come back. Doctor, you're supportive of this as well.
Yes, I am.
How do you square that with the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm?
Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who has acknowledged helping more than 130 patients kill themselves, tonight reveals that 2 months ago he killed one of his patients himself and recorded it on videotape. Dr. Kevorkian has been tried and acquitted 3 times on the charge of assisting suicides, but this is different. He himself does the killing. Tom Yoke was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease.
Can you move your legs at all? Yeah.
You killed him. I did, but it could be manslaughter, not murder. It's not necessarily murder.
Kevorkian sees euthanasia as a fundamental American right.
If you don't have liberty and self-determination, you got nothing. And this is the ultimate self-determination, to determine when and how you're going to die when you're suffering.
Well, we're back, and we're talking about medical aid in dying, a topic that has been debated for quite some time. Now, 25 years ago, medical aid in dying was prohibited in North America, but that didn't stop Jack Kevorkian, dubbed Dr. Death by the media, from assisting with at least 130 patients' deaths. He was a medical pathologist who was eventually convicted of second-degree murder in 1999 and served 8 years in prison. Now, medical aid in dying is now legal in 11 U.S. jurisdictions, and that number is on the rise. Now, Dr. Kevorkian believed in the right to die, but certainly not everyone agrees. And we're going to talk about that today. Now, joining us in the audience are Kim Callanan, CEO of Compassion and Choices, the nation's largest and oldest nonprofit organization that advocates for expanding and improving end-of-life healthcare options. Dr. Banerjee, hospice and palliative medicine physician and vice chair, board of directors, Compassion and Choices. You are supportive of people having the option to choose their own path, their own journey, but of course under certain circumstances, right?
So a person has to be terminally ill, mentally competent, have a prognosis of 6 months or less to live, and be able to take the medication themselves. And this is the framework that was put in place. Actually, sort of you look at the growth of the of the movement and coming out of Jack Kevorkian, it was a very narrow framework. It was people who were already going to die, and it was just like Dan talked about with Brittany. It was about helping them to avoid the very worst, the very last part of the dying process.
And the conditions are there have to be 2 doctors that concur and then 2 witnesses as well, that there's no coercion, there's no selfish reasons for it. There are a lot of
13-step process,
Yeah.
a very, very specific framework. It's actually
Right.
really quite difficult to get access to the law.
Right. And Doctor, you're supportive of this as well.
Yes, I am, for the right circumstances.
And how do you square that with the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm? And how do you square that with your ethical commitments?
So I, as a hospice and palliative physician, like every other doctor, took the Hippocratic Oath, absolutely. But there's something about medical aid in dying and the ability for people that are already dying with a very complex and difficult disease to be able to die peacefully. I don't think anyone would want to say that we want our loved ones or people to die suffering, especially when they know that dying is around the corner. And that's why I feel medical aid in dying is a beautiful solution that medicine actually has now legalized in all these states to help patients die peacefully. For one, it is a medical practice, and I think the sooner people recognize it as a medical practice, they'll understand that it is not suicide, it is not euthanasia. You have to have physicians actually confirm your eligibility criteria. You have to make sure that that patient actually indeed has the prognosis of 6 months or less. No one wakes up one day healthy, walking around saying, I want to participate in medical aid in dying. They can't. They have to be eligible for it.
Joining us in the audience, Brian Johnston, author of Death as a Salesman, What's Wrong with Assisted Suicide, and former commissioner on the California Commission on Aging, as well as the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. So, Brian, you disagree with all of that?
Well, sure, I'd love to address that. I think it's critically important. And I think you as a psychologist are cognizant that probably the most powerful influence on our decisions at any stage is our emotions. And you can't dismiss the power of emotions. It's really very much the top of this issue. Good hospice, and that's where I have to disagree with the doctor. Modern hospice was founded in 1969 by Dame Cicely Saunders, who opposed the intentional killing of a patient. What a good hospice does is it deals with not just the patient, but the family. And I'd love to address Dan's needs too. But the family, the caregivers need intervention because of their emotions. This is a time when people are dealing with emotions they've never addressed. Unresolved conflict needs to be addressed. The number one indicator of a deeper depression is suicidal ideation. If someone expresses the desire for suicide, it's actually a cry for help. It's not for a revolver. It's a cry for a situation that they're dealing with a circumstance they've never had to address before. So what good hospice does is it addresses the need of that patient. They've never been through this before. We're only going to die once, YOLO. But the fact is, you only live once. But the fact is, you're dealing with this circumstance. A good psychiatrist, a good psychologist wants to help people over those deeper issues. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb, Dr. Phil?
Well, I don't think there are enough psychologists to cover all of the assumptions you've made that I disagree with.
Well, I've made no assumptions.
Well, you've made a lot of assumptions about emotionality and assuming that it compromises rationality. And I got to take a break. And when we come back, I'll talk about those things and invite Dan to join that conversation as well.
Sure, appreciate that.
Yeah, I bet you do.
Well, you got a good shot at emotions. We identify with your emotions.
We'll be right back.
Great.
No, there was a decision.
Hold on a second, sir.
Yeah.
Brittany applied for, qualified for, and received that medication in May. Brittany died in November. If she was emotionally compromised, if she was suicidal, if there was any killing going on, and you guys like using those terms for emphasis, if there was any English language.
We've been talking about medical aid in dying as an end-of-life option for patients with a terminal illness. We were just hearing from Brian Johnston, who you've basically said you don't need to die, you need a new doctor. You need somebody to give you pain medication.
And for deeper pain, for emotional pain, yes.
Yeah, and you're assuming that because there are emotions associated with a terminal illness, that person can't make rational decisions. And let me ask you something. Would you really feel competent and appropriate to step up and interject those value systems into a situation?
I do it right now.
Like Dan.
I'm a hospice volunteer day to day. Let's look at the language, Dr. Phil.
Well, answer my question first, and then you can make a speech.
I've been enduring speeches about the primacy of making decisions on emotions. I'm pointing out, I know, and I've made mistakes in my life. Almost always it's when I let my emotions not let me see the long-term implications. But when it comes to—
My question was, would you—
As a hospice volunteer, I do that. And by the way, nothing but empathy. I've lost loved ones. I have lost loved ones from very difficult cancers. So don't think you're the only ones that's faced this. People need to address the reality of life. And we're all going to die. By the way, nobody likes it. When medicine is used to cause the death, that's a transitive verb. And that isn't dying. In English, it's killing.
Do you think that if his wife makes the decision that she wants to do what she wants to do, she's not depriving another soul of their life? She's not infringing on anyone's rights, but you would step in and say she's compromised in some way emotionally?
No, I would actually step in and say, let's examine this deeper. I'm glad you're here.
What do you want to say, Dan?
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in what we've heard so far. So
unpack in your story.
So, for starters, modern, you refer to Brittany as if it was a purely emotional and things need to be addressed in the emotion and everything else, and that somehow those decisions, that any decisions that Brittany are making are being influenced by her emotions.
No, there was a decision.
Hold on a second, sir.
Yeah.
Brittany applied for, qualified for, and received that medication in May. Brittany died in November. If she was emotionally compromised, if she was suicidal, if there was any killing going on, and you guys like using those terms for emphasis, if there was any— Hold on, sir. Again, let me finish. Yeah. She died in November. She received that medication in May. It was sitting in the cupboard. She focused on living life. That was her goal. Her emotions, to be clear, were in check as she was making these decisions about life and death. Modern medicine is not able to keep a person from suffering at end of life in 100% of the cases. Anybody who makes any suggestion that we can, the arrogance of that statement. Well, I will line up scores of hospice care medical directors, nurses, and physicians who will say that is absolutely not true. Good hospice is a wonderful thing. However, it has its limitations. And so at the end of life, when they are not able to keep her from experiencing those seizures, the pain that not even Dilaudid could control, as I stated before, that is where it gives a person like Brittany, who has gone through this very protective process, that option.
The issue is medicine being used to deal with deeper issues, or is medicine being used to intentionally end a life?
To assume that because someone chooses to die rather than endure suffering and then die is because they have unresolved emotional issues, your words.
Well, it's not mine, Cicely Saunders, but also...
Look, let me finish.
Yes, okay.
Let somebody
it's not
finish.
I'm not making it up.
Let somebody finish a sentence.
They have been. Go.
Okay, that's fine. We've been talking about medical aid in dying for terminally ill patients, but what about those who aren't? We're going to meet a man who has been nicknamed the Dr. Death of the present day.
I want people, elderly people in our society, to be provided with reliable, peaceful, end-of-life drugs. My organisation, X International, is made up of thousands of people who also want that choice. Many of them have got the drugs, and they, as they tell me, are now living the best years of their life because they know they have absolute control. People will live longer and happier lives, and because of the feeling of well-being, society will benefit. That's the proposition.
Joining us from the Netherlands is Philip Nitsky, activist, author, and founder of Exit International, a nonprofit organization which provides rational adults, including many Americans, with and without terminal illnesses, the information and education about practical, do-it-yourself, end-of-life choices. Philip, thank you for joining us.
Well, yes, I'm very glad to join you, Dr. Phil.
This is a very controversial subject, obviously, and in the practice that you are involved in, it doesn't necessarily require someone to have the stringent guidelines that have to be met in the United States, such as a terminal illness with death within 6 months. So it's a very different protocol that you adhere to in your clinic, correct?
Yes, it is. I mean, we've got a slightly different philosophy. I mean, I would argue that to be able to divest yourself of your life if you're a rational adult is a fundamental human right. It's not some privilege for those sick enough to qualify.
2 American sisters' deaths recently made news headlines because they were not terminal. Are you seeing more non-terminal people reaching out to you?
Yeah, I think so. Even in the context of more places like the States of America or Canada, of course, bringing in legislation, people find it is quite hard. As was indicated earlier, it's actually quite hard to satisfy the requirements. You've got to be terminally ill. You've got to find someone who's going to say you're going to be dead in 6 months. It can be quite hard. People want a more flexible approach, and in many cases, people have very compelling reasons for wanting to die that are not medical. So where they can't get help under this legislation, I'll give you the best example we have, and that's of a couple who have been together for many years where one party is sick, perhaps dying. They could get help under Californian law, say, but their wife or husband says, I've been with this person for 20, 30 years, 40, 50 years, and I want to die at the same time. Now, that's not something that can be accommodated under any of the legislation anywhere other than in Switzerland.
Under what circumstances would you turn someone away?
Well, the criteria are really that you're a person of sound mind. This question of mental capacity is paramount and important. And even in Switzerland, you have to have that tested. And you've got to be an adult. We're not talking about children here. So they're really only the only criteria.
Death is obviously a permanent solution, and if it's applied to a temporary situation, that's where you really have a tragic circumstance. Somebody comes in with a transient problem, they're acutely depressed, they're in a transient life situation, it just seems like it's the end of the world. But, given time, you can work through it, you can resolve the pain, you can overcome it. And if they take their own life because of that, you're like, that certainly solved the problem, but the side effects were really overwhelming because now they're dead. That's what you're guarding against when you say they have to be of sound mind, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Mental capacity means, do you know what you're doing when you press that button or you take that drink? Do you know the permanence of death? And if you do, and you know all those things, you should be given this choice.
And you see it as a right, not a privilege to be awarded by someone else. So I totally get that. We have to take a break. My next guest says her mom was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer and the treatments just aren't working. She wants to know, does she have options? And in Oklahoma, it's not one of the 10 states plus Washington, D.C. that offers that option. We'll be right back. All hour long, we've been talking about the moral, ethical, and medical factors surrounding medical aid in dying, a topic some find controversial, others say is a human right. Over the summer, I got an email from a woman, Caprice, in Oklahoma, who is terminally ill, wanted to know my opinion on this issue. Now, unfortunately, she couldn't be here today due to her health, but her daughter, Sierra, is here to advocate on her behalf and says she wants to know her options.
My name is Sierra, and my mom was given a stage 3C metastatic ovarian cancer diagnosis a little over 2 years ago. She had surgery and went through 3 types of chemo, but nothing has worked. We live in the state of Oklahoma that doesn't have a medical aid in dying option. We will probably end up in Oregon since they offer non-residents to have that choice. My family and I have decided that whatever my mom decides, we are in full support of her. My mom is a fighter, but she wants to feel like she has the option. Dr. Phil, what are my mom's end-of-life options? And should we help my mom in assisting her death if this is her wish?
Well, Sierra, it's good to meet you. I'm sorry that your mom is ill. Robin and I have family in Oklahoma, so...
I know you're from Veneta.
I was born in Veneta, but not at the state hospital. There was another hospital there. Now, you've been listening to everything we've talked about here today, so before I say anything, has this informed your thinking at all, what you've heard today?
Cancer is what's killing my mom. It's not her choice to leave whenever she wants, regardless of if that's through hospice or, medical aid in dying. Cancer is going to be her death. It's her choice how she wants to leave. And I fully support that.
It is terminal, and they've made that clear to her.
She has the rarest and most aggressive type of ovarian cancer. There is no cure.
Has she made a decision about that? Does she know what she wants to do?
She does. She would, prefer to have the medical aid in dying option. Giving her that choice will let her have her life back in a sense.
There have been studies done about this, and it's not the pain that causes people to elect this the most. That's like 25%.
Right.
The number one thing was the loss of autonomy, not being able to be in control of yourself and your life, not being able to enjoy those things in life that you lived for was close behind. The loss of dignity was very high, saying, if it's an inalterable outcome, why do I have to be personally demeaned before I do that? And it's not what others would think about judging them, but how they feel. And, those are really big issues for people. How does your mother feel about those things? What's her thinking?
She just wants to be able to have the choice. She doesn't want cancer, like Brittany, she doesn't want cancer to be in the driver's seat. She wants to have that choice if that's an option for her.
It's the autonomy.
Right. I'm not one to say whether she's fit or not for this program. But if she wants to try it and she qualifies and, that's her choice, our family will be there to support her 100%.
Would she be someone that would let someone tell her it's not her right?
Probably not.
Do you want to say something?
Well, I wouldn't frame it that way. That isn't what I'm saying. You're all going to die, by the way. It only takes one psychologist to change a light bulb. But the light bulb has to want to change. Kubler-Ross is saying this is when people are going to look at their suppressed issues that they don't want to deal with. You can help people become actualized.
I just have to say, because
Yeah.
I am around so many people who choose this
I
option.
am as well.
Who choose the option of medical aid in dying.
Yeah,
and
causing death.
Those people absolutely 100% are choosing life. They get the prescription in their hand, and it is a
Understood.
prescription for peace of mind.
The book he's talking about is On Death and Dying by Kubler-Ross. I want to see what some of our audience say when we come back, and I'll start with you. You had your hand up earlier, so I'll get to you. We'll be right back. I want to hear from someone else that's with us today, expert in medical law and clinical ethics. This is Thaddeus Pope. Thaddeus, where do you come down on this? Is this going too far? Is it a natural extension of patients' rights? As an ethicist, where do you see this?
I think it is a natural extension of patient rights. Since the 1970s, people have been making deliberate decisions that hasten their death, right? This is just one more method to control the timing and the manner of the death. But the concept of controlling the timing and the manner of your death has been long accepted in medicine, in ethics, and in law. Patients in every state have the right to refuse life-sustaining treatment, right? So you can have a DNR order, you can stop dialysis, you can turn off a mechanical ventilator. And most of the 10,000 Americans that die every day make a deliberate decision, a healthcare decision, to refuse treatment that hastens their death. So that's already allowed. Also in Oklahoma and other non-MAID states, people can voluntarily stop eating and drinking. We call that VSED. That's an accepted method in healthcare to hasten one's death. If you have intractable physical or existential suffering at the end of life, you can get palliative sedation to unconsciousness, another accepted method for hastening death. So even in the non-MAID states, there are options.
Research tells us 67% of the physicians favor this being an option, but only 13% say they would participate in it. So they want to see it in place, but a lot of them don't particularly want to be involved in it. Thaddeus, thank you for your contributions here and telling us so much about this. I really appreciate it, and I think a lot of people will be reading a lot of the things you've written about this to gain some further insight on it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for airing a discussion on this really important topic.
Obviously, it's a controversial subject. I'm interested in hearing from my audience who've been listening. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm a hospice nurse, and I'm actually from Oregon. So I've had patients who I've been at bedside with death with dignity, and it is actually one of the most beautiful things I've been able to witness. I love my patients. They mean a whole lot to me, but seeing them deteriorate from illnesses such as ALS, glioblastoma, other cancers, and seeing them to get to the point where they can't even go to the bathroom themselves, and their families are having to wipe their bottoms, and they don't want that. You know, when they take that medicine and they fall asleep and you just see that peace on their face, I just can't put it into words. So I can't say no to anyone that would want to do that and make that decision for themselves.
Remember, the Lifeline Network is available 24/7 across the United States, and you can always dial 988. You know, there were over 47,000 suicides in America last year, and, you know, we certainly don't want that, that's for sure. And this new hotline, 988, is something I'm really involved in. For more information about today's episode and for resources on end-of-life options and the organizations mentioned today on both sides of this controversy, you can go to drphil.com. You'll find information there on thebritneyfund.org and Compassion and Choices, or if you'd like to share your story, log on to drphil.com. If you want to add your voice to the conversation, you know where to find me. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And if you're in the Los Angeles area, or you plan to be, we'd love to have you join us here on stage for a studio audience. The tickets are free. You just go to my website, drphil.com. And don't forget to follow and subscribe to my podcast, Fill in the Blanks. I talk about critical issues facing families and society today. And Robin's podcast, I've Got a Secret, where she talks to thought leaders, innovators, and she doesn't keep any secrets at all. She shares everything. Thank you for being here today. Stay safe. We will see you next time. Appreciate it.
Questions, are you jealous? All of a sudden I don't get it. Acting like we had some kind of premise. You ain't gotta be so possessive. Thought that we agreed that our thing was based on trust. Why you gotta be so curious and fuck it up? I don't have a thing to hide from you. You can check my phone and emails too. I'm so tired of it, I can guarantee that I only kiss you, baby. Tired of it, I can guarantee that I only kiss you. You can be obsessed with me, but please turn down that jealousy. You know it's just you and me, so please turn down that jealousy. Ain't a secret that I keep from you, so you ain't gotta be pointing fingers right at me. So please turn down the jealousy. Even when I'm hugging my old body, you're making a comment about his body, acting like you're in a competition. You ain't gotta be so possessive. Thought that we agreed that our thing was based on trust. Why you gotta be so curious and fuck it up? I don't have a thing to hide from you. You can check my phone and